similar values and things like that. Of course, I'm, you watch the news. I'm always trying to look at both sides of it, and or well, it's more than two sides, of course. But I keep waiting for the house of cards to collapse, and frankly, I'm surprised it's lasted as long as it has. I think it's just the whole narrative is so frail, and there's so little evidence behind the mandates that, So, but a lot of people are pretty set in their ways, and now once you actually get people on the track of actually, taking the vaccinations and going for boosters, there's a cognitive dissonance that sets in that actually makes it even harder for people to change their thinking. So I see that as well. People get more sort of rigid in their ideologies. So yeah.
All right, let's pause there and let's just start because it's getting juicy.
Okay.
All righty. Cool. I will kick the podcast off. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Plant a Seed podcast. We're here with Paris Williams for a second discussion, volume 2 of our discussion about psychology and the mandates, and we're really just going to let this go, naturally. And I'm joined by Dan Regstein. Dan's here this afternoon. How are you, Dan?
Hi, Jono. Hi, Paris. Yep, I'm fantastic. It's 2022 now, the new year, and there's everything is new. So I'm excited.
Including that computer you're using and the T-shirt you're wearing. Check it out for the listeners. Dan is rocking. It's not official.
My T-shirt is from Paris, and it wasn't actually intentional that I would wear the Paris T-shirt when we interviewed Paris Williams, but it's a special T-shirt. It's a souvenir from when my then girlfriend and I were on holiday in Europe, and I proposed in Europe, in Paris actually, to my now wife, and it's coming up to 7 years, and in 2 weeks' time. So it's a pretty special T-shirt as well.
But if you squint, it just looks straight up like a Paris Williams fan T-shirt. If you sort of squint, large Paris, small France, just take it, I think.
Appreciate it.
So we released a conversation that Paris, Dan, and I had back in 2021. Paris, of course, is a trained clinical psychologist and an ecologist, and has a really interesting and unique, broad perspective. And so we just wanted to open up. We've had great feedback from the first podcast, and so this time we just want to talk about what's come up since, what's changed. We've got now, children being, promoted to be jabbed, 5 to 11-year-olds. We've got parents, questioning decisions, making big decisions, irreversible decisions, and so much more. So where do we want to start, gentlemen?
I'm pretty easy. I also heard you, Dan, say you want to talk a little bit about maybe ecotherapy and the bringing psychology and ecology together. So that's
and maybe also bring in what you've been up to over the last few weeks of the new year. And, please tell us.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll start with that question. I've definitely been in much need of some self-care and some eco time. I actually did a 4-day vision fast on going over the new year. So that's how I celebrated my new year. It's a tradition I think virtually all Indigenous societies have. I'm not sure about the Maori Society, though. I haven't actually come across it in the Maori Society, but Native American and many other Indigenous cultures have a vision quest or a vision fast ceremony. And a friend and I did that, facilitated by my wife. So we actually, on our property, we found that we each find a personal space that speaks to you on the property, and you really rough it for 4 days, no food at all for 4 days, and you just tune into the environment, to your fellow earthlings, creatures, and turn to nature basically for some wisdom, for sustenance, and that was just amazing. So it was actually the first full 4-day quest I've done. So that was really nourishing and illuminating. And then a short time later, did a 5-day tramp on the Restart Trail, which is in Mount Aspiring National Park, which was just stunning. It was just last week. So just, yeah, so I'm feeling much better. I just really needed to get away from it all and have a break and connect to nature. So yeah, bring ecology and psychology together. I say I had to do that for myself.
So you've got fresh personal experience of ecotherapy.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Trying to walk my talk for sure. Sometimes I'm not so good. I'm pretty good at, telling my clients how to take care of themselves. And then I often forget about, doing that for myself. So make sure to definitely greet the new year and with a bit of a fresh day in mind. That's really important.
Nice. Could you explain?
I'll just say real quickly on that note, I'll just say we're actually, my partner and colleague and I are actually running a, here down in Dunedin area, we're running a facilitated vision quest ourselves next month for other people who are interested. So it'll be a 4-day, similar to what I did, but you have a few days preparation and then a few days integration at the end, so it's kind of 8 days total. And then we're also running a ecotherapy training over a couple of kind of 2 full weeks over a few months. So that's all coming up in the next few months.
Awesome. Could you explain briefly what ecotherapy is?
Yeah, it's kind of, in a way, it's almost sad that we even have to have ecotherapy. Yeah, like, I mean, if you look at our evolution, of course, we're earthlings, right? Like all other earthlings, we've evolved living in nature in the outdoors and living harmoniously and symbiotically in various ways with our fellow earthlings. And then something happened and we became further and further separated from our natural roots, you might say. And it's kind of where we find ourselves now, is really quite alienated in many ways from our roots, from the earth, from our earthlings. And ultimately, I see it as our essential self, really. Like when we become alienated from the earth and our earthlings, fellow earthlings, we also very much, I think, become alienated from our own essential self. And then that leads to all kinds of problems, right? It leads to all kinds of depression and lack of meaning and lack of connection and anxiety and just a general malaise, that goes with that lack of connection. And I think that's at the root of so much of what we're struggling with today. So, the kind of epidemic of so-called mental illness, I think a major part of that is the lack of connection with our roots, earth, sky, cosmos, all of that. And well, I guess you'd probably relate to that, just given, Plant a Seed podcast and all of that. And so a big part of what we're trying to do here is supporting people in reconnecting with our roots and recognizing that health comes from connecting more fully with our own self, like our own feelings, our own needs, making peace with our feelings, listening to what our feelings are telling us, and our body is telling us about what our needs are and what needs are getting met or not getting met. And as we connect to earth, we go outside, we get in the outdoors, we connect to the sunshine and the birds and the trees and the rivers. We're naturally, very few people will find, let me reframe that. Most people will find that extremely healing, just simply getting into the outdoors. Because again, it's something like most of us aren't even consciously aware of how much we're missing by actually becoming in this more sort of box society, going from one box to another box and being more and more isolated and from each other and ourselves. So this is really about fostering that reconnection and using the outdoors and earth as a way to support that process. And so not only is it just naturally resourceful and resourcing to do that, but we also find that it's really nourishing. So a lot of the maladies we're struggling with, like depression, anxieties, and just lack of meaning, will naturally start to come back online when we tune into nature in this way. So that's kind of more general ecotherapy. You can also do more focused ecotherapy. So if someone's working through maybe some severe unresolved trauma, or maybe going through a life transition, like youth, adolescents going into adulthood, or even adults going into elderhood, or various important life transitions. Indigenous societies have known for many thousands of years that actually spending time in the outdoors, connecting to the wisdom of the outdoors and our fellow earthlings, can help us to tap into our own sort of inner wisdom to help facilitate our own healing and our own life transitions. So you can kind of tailor ecotherapy in the different ways depending on what you're trying to facilitate or what particular thing you might be supporting someone through.
That's a profound notion, nature's wisdom.
Mm.
And there was a time in my life, in fact, for the majority of my life, I would have shunned such a notion. Nature's wisdom? What are you talking about? You know? And then it wasn't until I at least acknowledged that there was a lot of hatred coming from who I was being that was limiting anything that I didn't believe in or didn't already understand or hadn't already experienced. And it wasn't until I, acknowledged all of that was there, that I didn't know was there, that then I was allowed to see things for the way they are and started to notice the birds dancing and the interactions in nature and how that ripples through us, like really does, and I just wanted to acknowledge that for many people, I fully get those that are like at the moment listening to what Paris is saying, like, it's weird. Trust me, it's weird if you haven't experienced it. And what you've got to do is just allow it to be a bit weird for a start, like having sex for the first time. Dan's.
Yeah.
Are you surprised that I brought that up? No. Anyway, it's not comfortable and it's not familiar. At some point, you've got to push through that to experience it.
Well, it's actually, I think it's an appropriate analogy, really, because we're kind of talking about intimacy. Intimacy in the broader sense of the term. Obviously, sex. There's a physical and emotional and relational intimacy that goes with sex. But if you consider, again, our roots having very intimate relations with the earth, with the weather, with cycles of the weather, with our growing our own food, catching our own food, all the whole process of actually just surviving and being alive, and how intimate that was for us for millennia, right? For our whole history up until really, and only the last few thousand years is where things really shifted. So we're born into this world and we think it's normal to be so alienated from nature because that's how we were raised. But looking at our roots and our ancestry, it's the most unnatural thing in the world to live the way we live now, so disconnected. For most people, obviously varies a lot. And so there's a lack that people can't understand. They feel it. You talk to people, in my work, and they know they're missing something. There's a lack of meaning, a lack of sort of fullness in their life. People often turn to drugs or alcohol or certain stimulating activities to try to sort of capture what's missing. But it always ends up feeling like a bottomless bucket for most people. They get kind of momentary excitement or sense of fulfillment, and then it's gone again. They need the next fix. As opposed to something that's much more sustainable is actually just, turning again more to our roots and trying to live more connected. Like when you actually start, as you start actually having to grow your own food, for example. And you have to start thinking about the weather. Is it raining? Is it sunny? And the timing of planting and all of that kind of thing. Just that act starts to already put you into a much more intimate relationship with the outdoors. And most people will start to naturally feel more full and whole and nourished.
Something just came up, Paris, as you talked about growing your own food, and we talked about the shift from what's there for me present right now is when you grow your own food, you don't grow it saying, I own that carrot or I own that cabbage. And there's something happened in the world where we went from belonging to nature to owning it and to owning things and to obtaining things.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's like an unhealthy relationship.
Oh, yeah.
Position.
Yeah, we're all born into this really unhealthy relationship. It's advertised everywhere. You got to have the things. You got to look good. You got to have the dog and the attractive wife and the white picket fence and the dog and it's all about looking good and material. No wonder people are doing drugs to try and fit in. They just want to belong.
Well, it ends up being very superficial, right? Sort of, well, looking at human relations, the difference between having a kind of intimate, fulfilling relationship with another person versus where you just kind of flatmate, you might sort of coexist, and it never feels fulfilling.
I did that for a living.
Also, the aspect of the abuse, like what you said, Dan, the difference between a power with versus a power over. Like generally speaking, when you're, if you look at how all other maybe non-human sort of beings live, there's this total kind of power with kind of dance. Every living creature has its own niche and has its place, and sure, there's a certain kind of competition, but actually more important than competition is symbiosis. Like any healthy ecosystem has all these different creatures, plants and fungus and animals and insects, that actually they all contribute to the broader whole in some way. And so ultimately, when you look at the big picture, it's a power with. Like nobody's dominating. You have predator and prey, but actually they require each other. When you look at the big picture, there's actually not really a power over dynamic. It's a really more collaborative, symbiotic dance. And so like what you said, Dan, when you kind of think of, an abusive relationship, it's where you shift from a power with collaborative relationship with, your family members or your friends to dominating. As soon as we dominate other people or we dominate nature and we come into that attitude, then things are most likely going to become very imbalanced and unhealthy, and we're going to pay the price for that. Even the dominators are going to pay the price. We're going to end up hurting ourselves as well.
I would say particularly or especially the dominators.
Yeah, that's right.
I experienced for the first time in my life like a genuine experience of, because growing up I've always had the idea of, oh, it'd be great just to have a hut in the woods and that'd be cool, and then I remember how much I love high horsepower cars and motorbikes and all these stimuli that I grew up as being like associated with being a man or being manly. I experienced recently for the first time actually just being out there. I was hunting with my two kids. We're camping on the edge of Lake Benmore in a really secluded part of Lake Benmore, which isn't public, it's private. And actually just being like, wow, I could just do this. I could just as long as I can contribute to others through the internet and share my knowledge, I wouldn't need to charge for it. I wouldn't need to have money. I wouldn't need to stress about GST and tax. I'd just do it for my contribution, and I could live off this land. I have everything I need.
You touched on masculinity, Jono, and I was wondering if, Paris, you could comment on the masculine and feminine sort of psychological aspects in relation to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, I think we all hold these topics differently. Personally, I would see that the principles of masculinity and femininity. If you look at different spiritual traditions and indigenous traditions, there's certain qualities that they each contain, right? So femininity tends to be more about openness and receptivity and sensitivity and care and nurturance and these kinds of things. And masculinity tends to be more about sort of strength and courage and maybe like leadership and action, right? So you kind of have these different sort of yin yang, masculine, feminine. The different spiritual traditions all point to the same sort of kind of dialectic, is dualism. But generally, when you look at any healthy ecosystem or living being that we would say is healthy, like really this seems healthy, or person, human, what you find all these qualities. You find like whether you happen to be of the male or the female sex, if you're actually really sort of a fulfilled person and generally living an enjoyable life, you're going to probably have a lot of both of those. And society in general, contemporary society has generally moved more and more towards like fragmenting these two. Whereas if you're a man, you're a male sex, you're supposed to have these manly qualities, obviously important qualities, things like courage and the willingness to take action and leadership and things like this. But then the feminine is considered, like it's not good, right? If I'm a man, I'm not supposed to be too nurturing or too caring or too vulnerable or too sensitive, right? That's not manly, right? So we end up with these kind of messages. And you get a bit on the opposite side too, right? Female women are just supposed to be really pretty and maybe nurturing and et cetera, but they're not supposed to be, in the more extreme cases, they're not supposed to sort of maybe hold leadership roles, and courage isn't so much, a quality that's so much appreciated in women. And so you end up with this real fragmented society, and you end up with both men and women, again, feeling quite self-alienated, I think, because I think ideally we all have masculine and feminine qualities within us. We vary a fair bit with that. But if you have to sort of throw away half of those qualities because I happen to, have male sex or female sex, then I'm going to be missing a big chunk of my essential self. And then that's going to cause a lot of distress. And it's going to lead to that void, that sense of lack, which is just so prevalent in the modern world.
Is that Paris where said person will look for that quality that they're perhaps suppressing in another partner, and then becomes a dependency?
Yeah, I think, sure. I think that can absolutely happen. Yeah, kind of, there is something to, I think the opposites attract it, right? Because there's, on some level, whether we're conscious of it or not, if we've pushed certain qualities, attributes away, we had those conditioned out of us, they're still a part of us. So they don't actually go, all they go is sort of down, and they become repressed, and we feel a lack. And so on some level, we're going to be attracted to that, what we're missing, the nourishment we're missing. So yeah, I think that makes sense, and certainly in a lot of cases.
And masculine is not man, and feminine is not woman. You can almost say, like, it doesn't mean, yeah.
Kind of more like a spectrum. I tend to see it more on a spectrum. Like, we all have feminine and masculine qualities just inherently, intrinsically within us, and then they're going to vary. And I would say, there is some truth to the fact that there is there is biological differences between men and women, obviously hormonally and otherwise, which is going to maybe, you might say, create a propensity towards having more of one set of qualities than the other. There's going to be like just a generalized propensity based on your biological sex. But then within that, if you look at all men, for example, there's a total spectrum of what's natural for any particular man. Some men are just naturally going to have more, embody more feminine qualities, and some are naturally going to embody stronger on the masculine side of the spectrum. And the same with women. So I tend to see it as a spectrum. And I think part of anyone's personal development and growth work is actually trying to set aside the various conditionings that we might have, been raised in our society or family, and actually just really get to know yourself. Like, okay, who am I? Like, what are the qualities I really value? Forget what anyone thinks about me. Like, what are the qualities that are really important to me, and do I want to start bringing into my life? And just get to know ourselves in that way, and begin by just recognizing that, well, any healthy individual is going to have all of them to some degree. And then we're all different in how much of it they might have personally. And then that could even shift throughout your life as well. When you're 18 versus when you're 60, it's probably going to be some differences.
Do you think we dig ourselves a hole even by identifying these characteristics? Like, even just saying feminine, masculine?
Kind of create a false dichotomy, kind of.
Yeah.
You mean?
Yeah,
especially because we kind of almost, pathologize is a strong word, but we sort of denigrate. If you're a man, you're supposed to have these, and if you're so because society does that, then we sort of exacerbate it by. But I think if you're coming from a more healthy society already, and again, I kind of turn to the Indigenous societies. Obviously, there's so many of them, but in general, they tend to, from my study, they tend to be much more embracing of the plurality, embracing of the wholeness that we all have masculine and feminine qualities. So then when you talk to those sort of divisions, they hold it in I think a more open way.
Yeah, I get it.
Modern society kind of entrenches it further.
You severed them, at some point, even though, I'm with you now, because I hear Alan Watts mentioned quite often, particular one I listened to recently, where it's like, different times in life we might need very, soft and creative and, generous qualities. And then other times we may need really firm, borderline aggressive, assertive qualities. And it depends on the day, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I think there is something to a very rough sort of dialectic happening. I wouldn't say like a duality, like a rigid duality, but there is, just looking at the universe. There are, you just see the same kind of dance happening, this dualistic dance happening between these two kinds of energies, this kind of yin or yang versus energy, or masculine, feminine, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I think you find that everywhere throughout the cosmos and ecosystems and individual beings. So I wouldn't just totally throw it away. Like I think it is helpful to recognize there is some kind of dualism happening there, but to hold it much more lightly and openly, and recognize that any healthy person and system is going to involve a real harmony of those.
Is that why we see, Paris, do you think, in governance and in policy, in politics, seems to be very masculine, seems to be very, assertive, firm, yada yada. And then we hear this, I keep hearing this notion of the awakening and the rise of the feminine. And it seems like, I mean, for me in my late 20s, and it was 28, this whole Saturn returns thing I discovered, like a whole lot of my life started to change. I really flipped from aggressive, assertive, know everything, will not demonstrate vulnerability, will not love and will not be loved, to this very, who I am today at this current moment for the last few years, because I'm clear that we change, as you said, to this more, I would say, subtle, creative, open, authentic, generous, giving, less judgmental person, and it has been really powerful. And I think, and knowing Dan really well, Paris, getting to know people like you, like it seems to be that there is this real rising of a more feminine male, like, and not to lose any qualities of when leadership is needed. I'm clear that I am a leader, but I'm also clear that there are definitely, like, I'm getting closer to that balance. And I think maybe as a global population, it seems to be something similar is happening.
Yeah, I would say, well, I mean, generally speaking, contemporary society has been, if you look at the last hundreds of years, maybe even further, a few thousand, really, has taken a pretty strong sort of patriarchal swing to prioritizing the masculine qualities over the feminine. And of course, and it shows up literally in sexism and whatnot. And like you say, in politics and this tendency to demean the feminine, the receptive, the generous, the caring, the nurturing qualities, and prioritize and give more importance to the more maybe courageous, assertive, action versus being oriented. And so, yeah, and I think that division and that imbalance has certainly caused a lot of problems. And when you see, especially when you see the masculine qualities without the generosity and the nurturance and the compassion and the care, then you end up with dominance. You end up with a real well, that's kind of the definition, toxic masculinity. It's not a term I necessarily like, because it can sort of be misunderstood as saying masculinity is toxic, which obviously I don't agree with at all. Masculinity is just important, femininity, but taken to its extreme, either one, becomes really problematic. If it's just if you're just masculine without feminine, which is a lot of what's happened in politics, you end up with things like war and power and dominance and power over, and you shift into a much more kind of oppressive kind of society, and a less egalitarian, a less caring, a less compassionate, so those qualities tend to get thrown away. And so that's kind of where we are right now. So, and I see what you're saying. I try to be optimistic and go, okay, the pendulum hopefully will start swinging into a bit more generosity and empathy and compassion and kindness. And you certainly see pockets of that. I don't know, collectively, I don't know, but hopefully. but
it seems like there's been like this but this great, this great. You talk about war and masculinity and assertiveness, and how the two, like if we've got people in politics and decision making and power being dominant and then we've got the people on in the public also we've got this thing, this two brick walls, and then all of a sudden if we're being more fluent and more more understanding, more accepting, more generous, all of a sudden like there's nothing going on, and eventually this, what I'm seeing is like this will fall over and there'll become some balance.
Well said. That's the power of empathy. Like, I'm a really huge believer in empathy, which is basically about just trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes, like trying to understand, like, so what's going on for this person? What are they feeling? What are they
not
needing?
Sympathy, right?
It's not sympathy, yeah, but actually, like just curiosity. Like, so they're a human being, I'm a human being. Everything anyone does, they're trying to meet a need. And so if we have this going on, it's because we're not seeing each other as humanity anymore. We're seeing the other person as the enemy, and we have to protect ourselves and try to neutralize them and neutralize their threat. We talked a lot about that in the last episode. But if one of you has the capacity or the wherewithal to just go, you know what, I'm not going to keep butting heads, or I'm going to drop the tug of war rope, or however you want to look at it, the tug of war game suddenly has to stop. Because if I suddenly just shift to empathy, like, okay, well, help me understand what's, your perspective, what's going on for you. What do why are you behaving like this? What need is it you're trying to meet? And is there some way I can help you meet that need in a way that's also considering maybe my needs and other people's needs, and it's just the whole paradigm. And it's so powerful. It's much more powerful than just butting heads back. Right? Eye for an eye, and pretty soon the whole world's blind, like Gandhi said.
Yeah. What you're suggesting, Paris, seems radical. That if one is feeling the impact of a force, that they should not fight that force, but instead to become more understanding and empathetic towards the perpetrator of that force. That's radical, and it's radical in a sense of going back to the root of what are the systems and what are the environments and conditions that led to this situation. I'm thinking about some of the structures, corporate structures, and just sort of cultural structures that are in place that kind of embed some of the psychology of power over, and how can we be radical, like you're suggesting?
Yeah, and when you say this situation, you're talking about like what's happening, especially around COVID and the mandates in particular, or just like society more generally?
Well, more generally, yeah. There's a lot of crises going on.
Yeah, that's right.
And it all seems to be linked to this sort of what we're sort of touching on, this power over versus power with, and how do we relate to the world?
Yeah. Question. I think, well, this also goes back to the kind of ecotherapy, I think, too. Like, I think once we, when we're actually really, like when I'm in my essential self, like I'm really embodied in my experience and I'm connected to my values and I'm really living this kind of, authentic way, not, based upon how I'm supposed to live or conditioning, but I'm actually really, in tune with myself and what my feelings and my needs are. I'm naturally going to find myself feeling more fulfilled than if I was disconnected from self, right? I'm going to just generally feel more sense of joy and peace, and when things aren't working, I'm going to be, alerted to that. Oh, there's something wrong, something off here, because I'm going to have that connection, and I can, okay, what's the need here, right? I need some safety, or I need freedom, or whatever it is, and then I can tend to that because I've got this real connection. And as soon as we sort of disconnected ourselves from Earth, from our place in Earth, and the world, and our fellow Earthlings, which is kind of what humanity has really done, especially in the last 10,000 years, then I see that as the root of my essential self. So I've already taken like one big root of myself, pulled it out of the ground, so to speak. And there's going to be an experience of lack. And then it gets further. And then as we live in societies which start to, extract feminine from masculine and condition you to that certain parts of yourself are not okay, you're not supposed to have those feelings, you're not supposed to have those qualities, then more roots get pulled out. And the more roots I pull out of my own essence, the more lack I'm going to feel. I'm going to start moving more and more into a place of deficit. And also threat, like we talked about last time with trauma. I'm going to start experiencing the world as more scary and as more scarcity, like there's not enough, there's a lack. I'm going to be more prone to being scared, to being more angry. I'm going to be more defensive, protective, right? So I start moving into this kind of state. And I get more, and I think that's basically, if you look at the big picture of humanity, from sort of, you might say, the Garden of Eden, when we lived as hunter-gatherers and we had our intimate tribes, and obviously there's, I'm not saying that was perfect, I'm not romanticizing that, but certainly we were far more connected with Earth and with ourselves and with our fellow, tribe members, and all of that than we are today. We've become more and more disconnected in so many ways, more and more fragmented. You look at sort of what, I don't really like the word mental illness, but mental health disorders have skyrocketed, and especially in the last 30, 40 years, they've gone exponential. Right now, on average, 1 in 5 people are taking psychiatric drugs, and more than that are taking, other kinds of drugs, recreational and et cetera, and alcohol and all, excessive alcohol and stuff. So we actually ended up in this place of a culture that most people are really fragmented, and they're really disconnected, and they're really uprooted, in the sense of not feeling connected to themselves, their family, other people, on so many levels. And so we move into this scarcity mentality, and our whole system gets dominated by fear, by anger, and by helplessness, and a sense of also scarcity. There's not enough. And so, like, I know personally, like, I look at the state of the world and I get really sad. I just see the biosphere kind of falling apart, and this mass extinction that we're heading towards, and mass deforestation, and all of this. And I'm pretty, it makes me sad. It makes a lot of us really sad. And I tend to turn to I look to the elites. I look to the people who are sort of on top, who have the vast majority of wealth and political power. And it's easy for me to get pretty pissed off with them, like they're taking advantage of all their wealth and look just to make more money for themselves, and they don't seem to really care about the earth and other people very much. And then I try to remind myself, well, they're human too. Why would somebody act like that? It's basically psychopathic. Like,
they're still in the lack, aren't they? Like everyone else.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so remember, they're a human being, and they're actually caught. So it's a bottomless bucket. And the more, it's like, I could get millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and I still can't feel this sense of scarcity. I need more. But the problem is, I'm trying to get more of the wrong thing. I'm trying to get more power, more wealth, when what I actually really need is more intimacy, like in the broadest sense of that word. I need a deeper sense of intimate connection with myself and my fellow humans and the earth. And that's the only thing that's going to fill the bucket, not more millions or billions of dollars. So I recognize that we don't actually have it in, our diagnostic system. We should, which is basically a greed disorder, which I think is the most harmful of all the mental health disorders on the planet. Is I would call it a greed disorder. But it comes from a sense of scarcity and lack from the disconnection that we have. And so you end up with our system, the way it's designed, is ironically, those who are the least connected are the ones who shift more towards those sociopathic tendencies, because they have so little connection to self and others. They don't have much compassion. They don't have much empathy. They don't have much guilt or remorse. They're more likely to succeed in the way that our politics and our businesses are set up in today's world. And so they rise to the top. And so if you actually look at the numbers, there's a far higher percentage of sociopathic people at the top of the system in politics and CEOs than there are in the general population. And so you look around at what's happening. You look at the pharmaceutical industries and how they've completely taken over the health field and the mental health field, and some of the horrible stuff that happens there. You look at agriculture, right? You look at food, you look at energy, and just all these different things that are happening that seem just totally sociopathic, like people doing really horrible stuff. They're making tons of money, but they're doing horrible, harmful things in the process. And you realize that actually they probably need more help than anyone. They're so disconnected. If we could get them outside, get them connected to the earth and the sun and the birds and themselves, and actually have some intimate connection with others, then maybe they'll, start to have a bit more compassion and empathy, and start to, help us all move in the direction we need to, which is about being more connected and more considerate, and more, so we can be more sustainable and egalitarian and just. So it goes back to those deepest roots, I think. So that's where, I know I'm going full circle, but the ecotherapy and the trauma and well-being and the idea of moving towards a truly egalitarian system, I think it all kind of comes together here.
I feel like this weight lift right now as I think of all the resentment that I've developed towards a few people, like a particular woman in power in New Zealand, that I once actually really, applauded, and I really did. I thought, whatever. I certainly didn't feel resentment. There was a time where I did not feel resentment. I've personally shaken her hand. I've, been in presence and had conversations with in person. And recently I've been feeling these feelings of like anger, and wanting, the whole thing to blow over, and not caring about those people and what happens after they fall over. And it leaves me like one, frustrated, because and what was there for me when you just said that, Paris, about how perhaps those people need, I know you didn't say the words, but actually what I got was actually those people need love more than anything. Yeah. And as I sat there, I pictured me meeting that woman again in person and just saying, hey, look, I accept you, I love you, and that's it. That's all I would say. And maybe that would have more of an impact than all the hatred.
Yeah, kind of like what Martin Luther King said about hatred can only cease by love, not by more hatred, right? I can't remember the full quote, but yeah, exactly. So it's easy to you see each other as the enemy, and you add hatred, and you're just throwing, someone's coming at you with a torch, and you throw gasoline on it rather than water. We need to throw some love out there, right? Wow. But it's hard when the person's actually they're actually doing something like it's harming you and your loved ones. And so it's like, how can you, on one hand, like in the nonviolence philosophy, we talk about the protective use of force, where can I actually stop that person from harming me or others, but still love them? Because that's ultimately what we need to do to get out of this kind of mess. It's like we have to do both. There's some harmful shit happening, for some of this, particularly those who are holding, the reins and the power in the world. And the common people have to find a way to, try to stop that. But at the same time, not just hating the people that are doing it, just seeing them as who they are. They're misguided human beings that have become really misguided. They become really lost, and they need some guidance. They need some love. They need some support, and they need some to stop doing that shit.
Yeah, it's both. It's you just said about we've talked about masculine, feminine. Like what came into my mind was here's someone hurting my partner. All right, I'm not going to sit back and go, hey man, I love you. It's going to be like, hang on a minute,
stop,
and then look, I don't know what you're going through. Don't be taking that out on my partner.
Yeah, I'm stop that and let's talk.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Wow.
It's like not avoiding. It's not discarding the person with the behavior. And that's where it comes into parenting a little bit, because it's there's lots of behaviors that we don't like that our children display, but this is what parenting is still like showering the children with love no matter what behavior. And imagine if we could use the same skill set to hold people who we see their behavior as being destructive and really unhealthy and really unhelpful for those that we love, but to be able to use the skill of empathy and compassion and saying, look, I really love you. And what's going on with that behavior that is not helpful and expressing both.
Right. Yeah. It's really important. I think it's a really important analogy, because that's essentially what you're. When someone is doing some harm or violence, there's always disconnection. Like again, in the nonviolence philosophy, we basically equate violence equals disconnection, because if you're actually feeling like a genuine sense of connection with another being, human or other living being, it's really hard to be violent towards them, at least in that moment. I mean, obviously you can shift, you can feel very loving towards someone, and then later you get really pissed off, and then you don't, but then you become disconnected, and then you might do something violent. So you see the two together. So how do we, if we can recognize it when people are doing harmful or violent things, there's a disconnection there. We can just count that that's reality. And so we often, in parenting, we often use the terms connect and then redirect. So it's like help them to reconnect first, maybe a little empathy. And you might have to actually actively stop them if the child is trying to grab a snake or something. I was like, okay, grab them, don't do that. And hey, what's going on? That's, that snake's really interesting, huh? You kind of empathize with them first and go, well, you know what, that snake could potentially really hurt you. So then you redirect. And so in many ways, that's how, when we see other adults or human beings, that are doing harmful or destructive things, like on some level, they're acting like a child, right? There's a disconnection happening. There's an ignorance happening. They probably on some level, they don't realize exactly the harm they're doing. They might cognitively sort of realize it, but they're not really getting it on a heart level. Like, I'm like actually causing serious harm here with this action. I know the pharmaceutical industry has been a major one that's up. And I've been interested in the pharmaceutical industry for a very long time in my work and my research. And sometimes I'm just like, wow, they're actually like some of the things that happen, like the falsified research and hiding the adverse effects of different medications and vaccines and things. And like, they know that they're harming a lot of people by hiding all that and falsifying their research. They, like, on some level, they know that's what they're doing, but their heart doesn't know it. Like they clearly don't get it on this level. If they actually had to really look that person in the eyes and feel a heartfelt connection to this person that they're harming, they probably wouldn't be able to do it. And so often it's about that. How do we help those who are doing harmful things sort of reconnect to their own heart, their own essential self, and so that they can actually see the harm they're doing and get it.
And that could be the same with like addiction in your own life. Like, let's say, my experience with, let's say, diet, or okay, so I'm going to not, like back when I was playing with and I still play with fasting, but there was a time where I was like, right, every day I'm not eating breakfast and lunch, I'm only eating dinner, and like bringing in these hard rules, like this. And then like it's like I find that, and my experience with others who have gone through addiction, and I'm not like it's someone that's addicted to food. I'm more talking about when I like gave up smoking cannabis, and I did it with a friend, and we were both sort of going through the same experience at the same time, and it was like there was a lot more in actually allowing and accepting us personally, like just like it's okay, like you're okay, rather than you're not doing this. Like it seems to be like maybe there's something that we need to look in within ourselves, and perhaps when we're having these altercations even with other people, or when we're dealing with things in our lives that we're making wrong, or we're telling ourselves we shouldn't be doing, maybe there's different language. Rather than like you shouldn't be doing that, it could be like let's look at what's missing, let's address what's creating the need or the demand, and rather than saying no, you will not do that, perhaps just like, I don't know what the answer is.
Can I respond to that? I have an idea.
Yes.
So we talk about, in psychology and psychotherapy, we often talk about parts, how we all have different parts inside of us. And it might sound weird at first to a lot of people, but if you think about it, like what you're describing there, there's a part of you that's like, nope, I need to get whatever thin and healthy, and I'm not going to eat. And this other part of me is like, oh, come on, I just want a bit of pleasant, want some pleasure and taste sensations or whatever it might be. So we have different parts, and oftentimes they get in conflict with each other. And so obviously having compassion for both parts is what we want, and curiosity for both. There's not, rather than picking sides, it's kind of like with people that are in a fight. You know, they're both actually trying to represent some important need. How do we actually have some mediation? And so then we can do that with ourselves. Like, oh, what's interesting is this part of me that's, you know, it's really devoted to my health. Wonderful. And this other part of me is devoted to, you know, having some joy and pleasure. Well, that's important too. I don't want to throw that away either. So how can we sort of bring them both to the table and have a dialogue here and find some solution where, you know, I don't have to throw either one of them away. That's one way of thinking about that kind of work.
Are you familiar with the work of Ian McGilchrist, Paris?
Yeah, I am a bit. I haven't done a whole lot into his work, but yeah, I've listened to a few of his podcasts and read a few of his articles and things.
Yeah, he's really inspiring for me at the moment. And when you talk about parts, it just resonated with what I've read so far. His work into the two hemispheres of the brain and how the right hemisphere views whole systems. Or yeah, I don't know much depth about it, but yeah, to me, the right is more about wholes and connectedness, and the left is much more analytical and separates things. And yeah. And it seems to me like the right hemisphere is often neglected, whereas because there's not a lot of sort of evidence or analytical facts that pop up from the right hemisphere. So if there's an internal struggle between the two hemispheres, the left hemisphere seems to often win because it's got all the facts and data and figures, and the right is more it's more inclusive.
And it's more, our society tends to value the qualities of the left more. And by the way, it can actually be reversed in some individuals, but yeah, for most of us, the right side is going to be more holistic and looking at the big picture and kind of more pattern oriented, and the left is going to be more discriminatory and analytical. And that's also the seat of our speech centers, you know, that can actually articulate speech and listen and all of that. And our present society values that more, which I think goes hand in hand with, again, going back to the idea of ecology and ecotherapy, goes hand in hand with that movement away from a much more holistic way of, you know, living in the world. When you have to live as hunter and gatherers, you have to have a much more holistic perspective. The ecosystems are extraordinarily complex, and you know, there's just sort of the appreciation of the holism of how there's each part that the left side, you might say, is kind of looking more at the parts and their particular attributes, whereas the right side is looking at the big picture. And health, ultimately, health comes from the word whole, same root, is about wholeness. You know, whenever you have imbalance or some parts that are getting neglected or whatever. And we've moved into a society that's becoming more and more left-centered, more and more discriminatory, more and more reductionistic, and less holistic. And so, yeah, it's all kind of, I think, so again, part of appreciating the holism more is actually spending more time in the outdoors and complex systems and appreciating symbiosis and, you know, interdependence and all of that. So yeah, that's, yeah, really, really great frame. I think really helpful, and also helps to kind of diagnose a little bit of where, you know, where we've gone a bit astray, I think.
You mentioned comfort bubbles earlier in our discussion, and I'm sitting here in my office, and I'm definitely in a comfort bubble at the moment, and thinking about going outside into the wilderness, like considering going camping this weekend. And even camping, there's a lot of opportunities to stay in that comfort bubble and not to be really confronted by the wild and the nature. Yeah, like we often talk about, and we sort of, I feel like the way we framed up ecotherapy and connection with nature is leaning towards romantic. And I know you've had recent experiences in the wilderness, and I know it's not always romantic, and often it's scary. So yeah, I'm just thinking along the lines of like, maybe some of that fear of the wilderness is healthy to jerk us back into the reality of, well, this is really complex, and I'm part of this whole.
Yeah, I'm one species of many, and actually I'm both predator and prey.
Not just predator.
Yeah, that's right. And it's right. I mean, well, that's one thing, with the power we've developed as the human species, right? We've developed so much power with our particularly prominent prefrontal cortex and our opposable thumbs and our upright pot. We have these attributes which have given us a lot of power and the capacity to sort of leap out of our niche, you might say, from the plains of Africa, where we were just one species of many. We weren't, more or less powerful than really any other, to actually kind of dominating the planet in so many ways. We have these attributes, but it creates this illusion. It creates this illusion that we are separate, man versus nature, human versus nature, right? Which of course is an illusion, because we can't possibly survive without the rest of this world. And we don't get we've lost track of the sense that, yes, we've moved ourselves to the top of the food chain, you might say, and we've gained a lot of power, but it's come at the extraordinary expense. So often, you've probably heard the analogy of cancer cells. So like a cancer cell, you might say, is a cell which so all of our cells, right? I have billions of cells in my body, and they each hold their own individual existence important. Like each cell is a living organism in its own right. It actually is it's a whole being, a holon, we say, where it does its best to maintain its own survival, but it also contributes to the well-being of this whole being. And all of the cells have to work together, synergistically for this to function properly. But some cells, for whatever reason, and it could be, lots of different reasons cause it, they lose that connection with the whole self, and they become essentially, so we call this cancer cells, they become essentially just fixated on their own survival and their own reproduction, and they're no longer contributing to the broader system anymore. It's like they've forgotten that they're part of this body. And so what happens initially, because they no longer contribute, all their energy is on just reproducing and surviving themselves. They grow like mad, right? Cancer cells grow really fast. And so it looks like, oh, look, they're dominating. Look how great they're doing. These cancer cells are, they're just thriving and they're growing, wonderful. They're in charge of everything. And eventually they thrive their way to their own demise, don't they? They thrive their way until the body dies, and they die with it. And so in many ways, that's kind of how I see what's happened to humankind. We look at us, we're thriving, we can do whatever we want, we're in charge of everything, and we've forgotten we're just part of Gaia, right? We're part of the earth, we're part of this whole body, and we're actually killing it. or we become like the cancer because we've forgotten. And so on some levels, like we have to sort of remember. We have to come back to being a member, a kind of egalitarian member of the earth, I think, if we're going to survive. I know it sounds like a really radical concept to probably most people, but if you actually look at the trajectory, and we keep thinking we're going to techno our way out of it, right? We're going to technologize our way out of this problem. But all we're doing is further separating ourselves from the earth. The cancer cells growing just faster, and we're more quickly killing the earth as we do that, which ultimately is our own demise. People talk about running off to Mars or something. It's just so absurd, as if Mars is a better place to live than what we already have right here. But so on some level, there's going to have to be a great remembering, I think, and it's going to be really hard for us because we've gotten really used to being, all the benefits of living on top and having the extra safety and whatnot. But the illusion eventually crashes, I think. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. I know that comes across pretty radical to most people.
No, I really. You go ahead, Dan.
Sorry, I just want to quickly say it does. It is uncomfortable, and it touches on a sort of a really unhelpful feeling that I sometimes get in discussions about environmental topics, and in the way of the human being the bad cell, like the bad actor in this game, and I feel like that is entirely an unhelpful illusion because if you feel bad, you're not inspired. You're like, yeah. That's just what I wanted to say at that point. And what's there for you, Jono?
Yeah. What's there for me is when we have certain characteristics dominating a bit like the cancer cell. We get into this world, and it's particularly something that's been really present for me recently when I had a conversation with a woman about how our children are going to deal with young children and those that are already eligible to be vaccinated, 12s and over, but particularly the 5 to 11s. They want to belong to a community, and the community generally has it's like a very clear-cut yes, no, left, right mentality. And my conversation was like, how do we bring about the allowance and the accepting of all these different, Paris mentioned symbiotic earlier, or symbiosis. How do we allow for different perspectives? Because if one idea becomes dominant, it's a bit like the cancer cell. It seems like a good thing. Oh yeah, our idea is winning. And then all of a sudden we realize that nature doesn't work that way. There's never one way of doing things. And we need, I always say in the talks that I do, the most powerful communities are those with the most diverse skill sets. So if everyone's a butcher, sure, we'll have great steaks for dinner, but, we're not going to be able to teach each other any other skills, So that's what's there for me is like, how do we bring back diversity of opinion and perspective and just allow it all to contribute to the whole, rather than it being just a left, right, yes, no community, like you're in or you're out.
Lovely. Yeah. No, I've really resonating with both of what you said about the diversity and also about the feeling bad. And I think what's really important is to recognize it's moving from that framework of sort of hierarchy, of worth, or power, where one species is worth more than another, because in any healthy ecosystem, each species has a really important, they have an important role. And I always get curious, like we talk about weeds and things, but, you look at, like you think about, we think of the weed, they're prickly and, sometimes they're poisonous and they grow really fast, but they're extremely important when there's been like some devastation, like a fire or some deforestation or whatever. They quickly come in there and they get deep tap roots to grab the nutrients from down deep, and they have thorns to keep maybe certain predators out, while the more sensitive climax species are regenerating, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's like for all of us. So as human beings, it's like we're amazing. Like it's absolutely incredible, the capacities that we've developed in so many ways, especially our mind and brain and what we can do with our hands, and unbelievable, right? There's never been a species like us. And it doesn't take away the worth of all other species and their important roles, and a healthy earth requires all of us to work together and appreciate that we each have our own niche and we each have our own gifts. So that's looking at it from like a broad interspecies perspective. So instead of thinking, oh, humans are bad, I think any other species would have done exactly what we did if we happened to evolve the particular attributes we evolved. I think we evolved these attributes, and that's what, I don't think it's good or bad, it's just what happened. But we've come to this really interesting place where we have so much power that we actually have the power to wipe ourselves out and take many species with us, and potentially like really harm this earth badly. And so we have the power to recognize that we can do that. We have like this we're in this really interesting situation, where we actually have to kind of go, well, we can carry ahead of what we're doing, but it's obviously going off a cliff, or we can totally appreciate and use our attributes like regeneration to support a reintegration and back into a diverse ecosystem, a diverse earth. And it's exactly what you're saying, Jono, with the human communities, or any community for that matter. Monocultures just are terrible. Monocultures are very convenient initially, like monocrops are convenient for trying to get a whole lot of food in a limited amount of energy used, but then what happens is not sustainable. If you just do massive monocrops, you deplete the soil because you don't have all the diversity, which contributes all the different nutrients, and you have to add fertilizers and pesticides, and you end up in this horrible situation where you have to have more and more fertilizers, more and more pesticides, and then the whole thing collapses eventually. Whereas a diverse system, it might not initially look so bountiful, but it's sustainable. All the different nutrients and gifts of all the different members of that community, whether it's an ecosystem or whether it's a human community or a school or a village, that diversity is totally essential in order to maintain, the sustainability and the well-being. And as soon as we create hierarchy of worth, then we get in trouble. This particular role is more important than this role. I think so. I love this question. Where does my soul's passion meet the world's needs? Because not only does humankind in general have a unique niche, but each one of us, there's never going to be another Paris or Jonna or Dan. Each one of us has a very unique skill, a unique gift, you might say, in this earth. We're in the same way Alan Watts uses this metaphor, in the same way that an apple tree apples, how if you use the word apple like a verb, the earth peoples, the earth peoples, the earth Jonnas, the earth Dans, the earth Parises. So, we're all part of this earth, and we all have a unique gift. So if we can get curious, where does my personal passion meet the world's needs? That's going to point you to where your own unique gift is, and where you can find a fulfilling life that also serves the greater good of the earth and community.
The bounties come in so many different forms. The bounty is not always about cash in your hand. The bounty is not always about providing a commodity crop, regardless of volume. The bounty might be in, feeding the bees or feeding the fungi that support the bees and protect the bees, or, you know what I mean? There's so many things that we're not seeing because we're stuck in this control mentality. If trust me, from my experience as an agronomist and someone who spent a lifetime or who made a living out of controlling weeds and focusing on weeds as the target, and we need to kill the weed, I did not see the effects of these monoculture crops on the ecosystem because I was just focusing on the weed. Nor did I see the benefit that the weed was giving. Like here's a completely diseased crop of kale, but these fat end plants are thriving. How? What are they doing in there? What is that plant providing? Just like when I was a child and I was told that I would never become anyone important and that I was a failure. No one looked at me and thought, what could I provide? What could I contribute if allowed to? See, if allowed to. And trust me, I was a weed, and I was I was attempted to be controlled. I was a prickly weed. Next wife will tell you I was just a prick. Yeah. And I was lucky I found, what it is that I have that I can offer, aligned with my passion, aligned with what the earth needs right now. And I tell you what, in doing that, I didn't need to think about giving up smoking cannabis. It just happened.
And I mean, if we come from that paradigm of trust in organicity, trust in that each one of us actually is a manifestation of the earth, and as a manifestation of the earth, we actually have something valuable to contribute to it. And we nurture children like that. If we trust, we just give children, nourishment and love and curiosity, like what is this child's gift, and actually treat them with wonder, then we can trust that they're gonna blossom and they're gonna have something amazing to contribute. But if we try to control and no, you need to be this, you need to do that, and we excessively control, and then we actually stifle their growth, and then it's a lot less likely that they'll be able to contribute, in a way that's good not only for their own well-being but for the earth and community. So yeah, it's just a very different paradigm.
Monocultures are a product of school as well. Like I just got that. I've never thought about that.
Yeah, monoculture school, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, mainstream school has a strong kind of monoculture.
Holy shit!
That's right.
Kids come in chaotic, diverse, and they come out picturing, Pink Floyd videos coming out of the mincer. They come in all comfortable and they come out uniform. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wow. Yeah, and education is so present for me right now. Like my children are 4 and 2, so they haven't started school. And at the moment, they are having a really nourishing experience at their early childhood education centre that's just full of experience and fun and interaction. Um, and what I'm kind of thinking of at the moment is almost like, what is sanity? Because I look at my children and sometimes, wow, it's almost like they're insane. They're all over the place. They're super duper diverse, and their attention is just so hungry for stimulus and for adventure and learning. And then I get this sense that there are certain people in our communities that are particularly hungry and interested in learning and adventuring. And yeah, I wonder if you could comment on sanity on some level, like and the need for a bit of insanity sometimes.
Well, first of all, one of my favorite questions is, what does it mean to be insane in an insane world? And you know, like if you actually consider, like I often consider that humankind, and you know, in a sense, has kind of gone into a kind of collective insanity, you might say.
Mm.
And so then if someone's acting a bit insane, is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, you know,
Maybe it's sane.
going against consensus reality. If consensus reality is a bit off the rails already, you know. So yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I did my whole doctoral thesis and research. Even wrote a book called Rethinking Madness. So yeah, I love this topic. What is madness? And you know, because it's actually relative, really. Like, I mean, there's a few different layers. One is sort of belief systems, right? Like we often say someone's mad if they have delusions, right? If they have beliefs that don't conform to consensus reality. But then again, if you had that, if you use that frame, then you might say one sort of spiritual tradition that all the members of them are mad compared to another different tradition, right? Because they have totally different belief systems or different societies, right? So that's not a very good, I don't think it's a very good definition at all. To just look at what somebody believes and say they're insane because they have certain beliefs. And especially going to the diversity sort of argument where, and that's what's kind of frightening me now a little bit about, or a lot actually, about the state of this world that we live in. We clearly, and again, this is my opinion, you may not agree with me, I have a very strong opinion that humanity is quickly heading off a cliff. Like I just can't see how we're going to sustain the way we're living on so many levels. And so it's insane, right? And in a way, it's insane in the sense that we have the wherewithal to see what's happening. You know, we're mass extinction, biosphere depletion, rapidly stockpiling nuclear weapons and making, you know, we're making even bioweapons and all kinds of crazy viruses and things. And we're doing all this, which is crazy, and it's just clearly not sustainable. And yet we're continuing on business as usual. Like everything is in the service of trying to maintain the status quo. And what is considered sane is becoming narrower and narrower. Like right now, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is what sort of people in my profession, psychiatrists, use, there's over 400 different diagnoses now you can throw at people. And so basically, it's getting to the point where if you don't toe this very narrow line of the status quo, then you've got a mental disorder. You know, something wrong with you. You're crazy, or you're evil. And now we've got a system, you know, with the internet, which obviously is wonderful because it facilitates communication. But you know, you've got the technocrats and the wealthy have become more and more in charge. Have now that we've become dependent upon the internet for our communication, have now becoming, like 10 years ago, you used the word censorship, and you know, we would all be like, no, bad, and now censorship is getting totally normalized, right? And so we're narrowing the capacity. Like if you don't walk this very narrow line of these beliefs and these values and this way of being, then you're going to be censored. You're going to be, or you're going to be given a diagnostic mental health label, which is really scary because we're becoming more and more into a monocrop. It's a very frightening, unsustainable monocrop, in my opinion. And so I think the only way out of it is to really radically embrace diversity. Like, it's actually okay to have really different radical beliefs. It's more than okay. It's actually healthy. Call it what you want. Conspiracy theories, doesn't matter. To have the freedom to actually have that cognitive, sovereignty, a cognitive freedom to think about things, to challenge things, to question everything. Because I think the only way that we're going to get out of the mess we're in now is by questioning absolutely everything, because the current system clearly isn't working. So, I know that's probably a bit of a ramble, but can you remember where we started?
I just wondered, like, what would it look like, a world where we were okay with not having all of the answers all of the time?
Exactly. That's essential. Easy going in the not knowing, right?
And this isn't like, I'm not promoting like blatant naivety. It's more like some form of curiosity. Like, what if?
Beginner's mind, like Zen, right? About the beginners, the willingness to have healthy and humble skepticism, like not only skepticism of others, but even your own beliefs, to not hold things so rigidly and so seriously. To be okay, actually I don't really understand this thing and I'm confused, and that's actually okay.
That'd be the politician I would vote for.
That's right. Absolutely. And actually, that's what science is supposed to be, the scientific method. So it's as a scientist myself, right, a PhD in psychology, and done my research, when this whole thing of trust the science, like, you can't get any more oxymoronic of a phrase than trust the science. Because what is science? Science is asking questions. Science is challenging everything. Science is
definitely not trust.
You formulate a theory, you formulate a hypothesis, and you do experiments, you gather evidence, and then, the more evidence you might gather, you develop a theory. But any theory, no matter how robust it might seem, can still collapse. Newton's physics lasted for several hundred years. And Einstein came along and he basically collapsed it. Like, we still use Newtonian mechanics and Newtonian physics for everyday calculations, but we actually realized that, in the big picture, it's actually not exactly right. Especially when you're looking at things that are really fast and really small, quantum level and stuff. It's actually wrong. But that's an example of a theory that was super robust, and then eventually it got overthrown, basically. And so this happens and this is what science does. It's always questioning, always challenging. And as soon as someone says, don't question, don't challenge, trust the science, that is not science. Not only that, but that's dogma. That's dogma, and it's a dangerous dogma, especially when our political leaders are telling us to do that, because then you end up painted into a corner. You're painting society into a totally uncreative corner where growth and development and creativity get stifled. And as soon as you stifle those things, you're heading towards your demise, right? You can't flex. You can't flex with the changing conditions. You lose that flexibility, that openness, that regenerativity. And so you see that kind of dominating the information landscape, right? That normalizing censorship and trusting the powers, trusting corporate power and political power and all of this, and getting in trouble, losing licenses, for challenging. Like, I'm getting punished right now by the psychology board for writing an article that is just simply asking people to let's actually openly have a discussion about mandates, and I'm actually being disciplined for that. Just which is a very scientific thing to do. I'm just, hey guys, let's talk about this. Let's look at the facts. Let's look at the evidence. Let's look at the harms. Let's look at the benefits of mandates. And I'm not alone. Many colleagues of mine are actually getting punished. They're losing licenses. And so we're creating an atmosphere right now where there's so much information, expertise, and wisdom out there, but people are actually getting more and more afraid to actually speak.
Yeah.
And so it's a really terribly dangerous path we're heading down right now. And I mean, I trust that, it'll become obvious just how bad of a path that is to enough people where we'll be able to push past this, but it's still not very pleasant to see it happening.
When people are scared to stand out, like those that could really make a difference, like those in law, being silenced.
Lawyers, doctors, psychologists, a lot of people who are really trying to make contributions to the world are, getting silenced and intimidated and threatened, and
Back to monocultures, more
monoculture, and that's the last thing we need right now. That's absolutely, you know, when you look at the big picture, you look at where humanity's heading towards probably our own demise if we keep things going. We need as much creativity and diversity as we can get, you know, as much wisdom and freedom of thought. Like that's what we need, that more than ever. So yeah, hopefully this is a little speed bump, and we'll go, what have we done? Okay, that's right. Freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of, you know, bodily sovereignty and autonomy.
Except the crazy friend. Let your children go a bit nuts.
Let
yourself go a bit nuts.
That's right. And that's exactly going back to the insanity thing, right? We've become now, the conditioning has become, we become scared. If I have any emotion or feeling or thought or belief that's outside this narrow box, and I must be crazy or something wrong with me. Which is, that is crazy. The fact that we have that in our system, that's crazy. Rather than a child, right? Like a child is an embodiment. You know, they haven't been conditioned that much yet. They're an embodiment, you know, most children, healthy children, an embodiment of wholeness, of wellness. They're just naturally inquisitive and creative and curious, and you know, they're just totally like open-minded and just, you know, drinking in the world. Imagine, we need more of that, right? In our older people, adults, teenagers.
Maybe a bit of fun as well thrown in there.
A bit of what?
A bit of fun.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's right. That's the other thing you see with young kids, isn't it? No problem with fun.
There's not much fun around right now.
Yeah, that's right. That's really, and actually I think those are very closely related. Play, fun, creativity, spontaneity.
Yeah.
Right? They're all kind of in the same basket. You know, they're all close cousins.
Maybe then we could hear each other a bit clearer.
Yeah, that's right.
Hear others' points of view.
Play, it's interesting, and neurologically and psychologically, play, you know how mammals all play? Like you see it, puppies and kittens and kids, they play with each other, right? And it looks like they're almost fighting, right? Like when you look at kids and animals, they're like kind of fighting, but they're looking at each other. I'm okay.
Yeah.
And they chase each other. It's actually like on our internal level, it's our connection. We actually call it our ventral vagus system, but it's our capacity, our connective aspect, our social engagement aspect is learning how to master our threat response. Fighting is about threat, right? Fighting and running is about threat. And that's an important part of our nervous system. But what's more important is that my social engagement part of my system can actually master that. And that's actually in the driver's seat most of the time, rather than this being in the driver's seat. So play is all about children and puppies and kittens learning how to master their own fight-flight system and put social engagement on top. And so play is like super important, you know, and it's not just kids, like we all need play. You know, we need to not lose play, because that helps us to not, you know, to keep our social engagement and love and compassion in the driver's seat, rather than fear and hatred and anger.
Wow.
The access to creativity.
That's right. Absolutely.
It's like healthy competition, learning about how to play games, but keep
and do it graciously as well, right? You know, because you can be in competition where you can quickly go to that fight, I hate you, and
like my kids when it's like play, yeah, and then next minute
you kicked my butt that time, good job, you know, gracious competition.
I think that leaves us in a pretty cool place.
Yeah, I agree.
I feel light. I feel like I just want to go and be with my son right now. I've got my son on his own right now. It's the first time we've ever separated our two kids, because they, you know, play 1 minute, next minute, literally belting each other, you know, in the head. And so we've just tried this thing of separating them, and I can see there's something missing in what they need, you know, and maybe I need to look at where it is that I haven't been providing that, or where I could be providing that. Maybe we wouldn't need to separate them. It's the first time in my whole, you know, the whole time I've been a father of two, that I've had just one child and we're going to swap over. But I'm going to use this time to really connect with each of my children and just see on a one-to-one level what's there for them and what I can be providing, and maybe I could carry that out into the world as well. With each of my relationships, what's there beyond what I think should be there, or beyond what society says should be there, and beyond right and wrong. And this would be particularly powerful in my engagement with my partner, rather than disagreeing with something, just bringing that curiosity and maybe bringing a bit of that fun there as well. So thank you, Paris. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Jonna. Yeah, thank you, Dan. I really, really enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you both very much, and hope you both have fun this afternoon.
Yeah.
And I'd really like to do this again as well.
Yeah, likewise. And I'm looking forward to some more play myself. So.
I might have to find out more about this next month's what do we call it down in Dunedin?
Oh yeah, I'll send you a link to that. Ecotherapy. So the first one is basically we're calling it a soul quest, but it kind of draws from the kind of the vision quest sort of idea. Most people are more familiar with that term. And then we're doing a proper training, ecotherapy training. That's more for helping people like counselors or therapists or coaches who want to actually provide ecotherapy for others. But that'll start in March. I'll send you the link to that.
Yeah, we'll add it to the publication. Make sure it's there for the listeners.
Oh, great.
All right, gentlemen.
Okay, go well.
Thank you.
Bye.